Welcome to Giants Latest. We know that if there's one position the Giants so desperately need depth at, it is the offensive line. And there is one player, guard Greg Van Roten, who is going to be an unrestricted free agent come the next few weeks. So Joe Schoen is at the combine. They were asked about free agents, and he said that this roster could look very differently in the next couple weeks. So when it comes to the Giants re-signing guard Greg Van Roten, what do we think? Now, he obviously didn't have an amazing year with the Giants. His overall grade in 2024 was 61st out of 135 guards. So he was in the top half of that, not amazing. His pass blocking grade was 64.9. He was 55th out of 135. And his run block grade was 62.3%. 66th out of 135. So my thoughts on Greg Van Roten are this. We currently don't have a starting right guard. And if their plan is to go into this season with it being Evan Neal or Joshua Ezeudu, they sure as hell better bring back Greg Van Roten, and they better bring in another veteran, because that can absolutely not be the move moving forward. But if they don't re-sign Greg Van Roten, they do not have a starting right guard. So I am all for depth across every position, especially if you can make it affordable. And I think that GVR can be re-signed to an affordable deal. At the very least, he is a serviceable backup if you can bring in a better right guard in free agency. So I'm on board with it. I think it's something that the Giants really should do, especially if they can work out a good, affordable deal with him. He's starting to get a little bit older. He might want to stay put, and he was okay, like we said, in the 60s across the board. So, first half of the guards in the NFL, which is not all that bad. But I know as Giants fans, we are looking for someone more stable and better than that, who can actually be a good, maybe great right guard, as opposed to just okay. But like I said, depth for this team is important. We know that injuries are an issue. I'm bringing back GVR on an affordable deal if possible. We will see in the next couple weeks if the Giants agree and they end up doing that. Let's talk about play calling, because Joe Schoen spoke to the media at the combine this week, and he was asked about whether or not he has talked to Brian Daboll about play calling and what he thinks about that. So let's see. This is a direct quote from Joe Schoen. He said that he has not discussed it with him over the last couple weeks. Ultimately, that's going to be Brian Daboll's decision. Now, I think this is very interesting because according to John Mara, what he said at the end of the season was that he was the one who brought it up to Brian Daboll and questioned him and said, is this something that you really think that you should be doing going into next season? So I think it's interesting that Joe Schoen said, ultimately it's his decision, as opposed to saying, we're going to talk about it more this offseason, or we have some things to work out and, we're not entirely sure right now, but I think I should be involved in the process. Very interesting that he's leaving it 100% up to Daboll. I think other people need to get involved, like Joe Schoen. I don't really want John Mara involved. But I do actually think that John Mara is correct, that it is something that needs to be looked into this offseason. And I don't think under any circumstances that it should be guaranteed that Brian Daboll should call the plays in the 2025 season. So as time comes out, we will see what they end up deciding. We will have our best inkling of this during the summer, during training camp and into preseason, because regardless of what they say, they will have made up their mind at that point. At that point, last year, Brian Daboll was calling the plays and doing all of that. And the year before that, it was Mike Kafka. So we will know by the summer what they end up deciding. I'm not sold on Brian Daboll calling the plays. I think he has a lot of things to work out. And the first thing he needs to be a better head coach all around. And I think that if you can remove play calling off of his plate, let him focus on some of the other things, and then you can think about bringing it back maybe later in the year. But I think Mike Kafka is not a bad play caller. I think ultimately he was limited by the roster and could only do so much. And I think, listen, whether it's Kafka or Daboll calling the plays, they're both going to be limited depending on what the roster looks like. I just think if you're the offensive coordinator, you should be calling the plays, especially if your head coach is not capable of doing everything that a head coach needs to be doing, and that is Brian Daboll. Speaking of play calling in the quarterback position, let's talk about how the Giants are going to find their quarterback, because again, Joe Schoen speaking during this combine, he obviously was asked a lot about the quarterback position, and he talked a lot about it. He said you can't manufacture finding the right quarterback, and you can't draft a quarterback just to say you did it. Now, I agree with Joe Schoen, but I think that you got to take swings at the quarterback. And he also said that he's taken swings at the quarterback position, which I beg to differ because during his tenure as the New York Giants GM, we're going into his 4th year, he has not drafted a single quarterback. Bringing in Tommy DeVito, who's an undrafted free agent, and bringing in veteran quarterbacks does not mean that you took a swing at the quarterback position. You re-signed Daniel Jones and you brought in vets. You haven't drafted a single one when you had multiple opportunities, especially last year, to draft a quarterback. So if I'm Joe Schoen, I'm drafting a quarterback this year, and if he's lucky enough to be the Giants GM in 2026, he better be drafting a quarterback that year too. Because if there's one thing you can never have enough of on a roster, it's good quarterbacks. And the Giants are not the only team who have learned this the hard way, but it's something that they really need to focus on and they need to consider. So Joe Schoen also said that we're going to look at all options. It's the most important position in football. We need to look through free agency, trades, draft, whatever it is, and we need to play better at that position. Don't we know it, Joe? He also was asked, of course, about veteran quarterback Matt Stafford because of all the rumors that have been going around that the Giants are going to trade for him. His direct quote is, "You'd have to ask the Rams that. He's under contract with them, so that would be a question for the Rams." And one thing that we have heard is that the Rams have granted Matt Stafford the opportunity to seek a trade. So we will see if that's true, and we will see if that actually is something that manufactures in the future and if he goes to the Giants. We've talked a lot about Matt Stafford, but we will really see how that goes on over the next few weeks. But in the meantime, let's talk about the rookie quarterbacks because they are going to be the focus of the next week or so during this combine process. Now, Shedeur Sanders has already announced that he is focusing the combine only on his interviews. He's not throwing, running. He is not doing anything at the combine except his interviews. Joe Schoen was asked if he takes this into consideration when grading the quarterbacks. Is he turned off by it? Things like that. And he said ultimately, no, he understands what the quarterbacks decide to do. If they do their pro days, they obviously have tape from the years that they were in college. And he said that he understands that it's their decision. He doesn't knock them for it. And he doesn't raise them up on his board just because they decided to throw at the combine. Now, Cam Ward has not decided what he's going to do yet. As of Wednesday, he's still undecided. The quarterbacks don't throw or do anything until Saturday, so he does have a couple more days to make up his mind. I am getting the feeling at this point that he will probably not make up his mind until Saturday morning before he's ready to go. One thing that I will say about Cam Ward and that I think has been interesting between him and Shedeur is they seem to have a friendly relationship, but a competitive one at that. So whatever one does, it seems that the other one does. So I'm very curious if Cam Ward thinks that he could get a leg up on Shedeur Sanders by throwing at the combine, knowing that Sanders is not. So that's the one thing that I'm very interested about. And, we'll find out over the next couple days. But ultimately, I kind of feel like Joe Schoen on this. Whether or not they throw at the combine, whether or not they have an amazing day or a terrible day, I don't really think it ultimately affects their draft stock all that much. So obviously, if they do well, it can help them. But realistically, how much is it helping them when they have pro days and years of tape versus one day where they're throwing to wide receivers who they don't know, they don't have any rapport with, and, the routes are going to be run differently than the guys they're used to throwing the ball to. So I would say take it with a grain of salt, regardless of what Cam Ward decides to end up doing. If he ends up throwing, I will be looking forward to it. He is the guy that I so desperately want the Giants to draft. So we will see what he ends up doing, and I look forward to seeing the rest of the combine this week. Make sure you follow Giants Latest for everything New York Giants coming your way.